This is Billy Kay, welcoming you to a history of Scottish literature. Programme 8, The Future Oors.
Like rebel angels, bright, restless, sensibly attuned to the flux and flow of mortal Falkirk, Belinda our chariot, our spirit guide, the wind rushing up and past her face thrust out like some wide-o helm of Troy, the low growl of Belinda's undercarriage as Dolby shifts her into fifth, and our mad singing at the dusk, mine, Brian's, Dolby's, Franny's, Hall Glen receding like stars at warp speed, 'cause it's Friday, 7:30, time for Top of the Pops and tramps like us, baby, we were born to run. The Glen Bray carrying us down, down into the belly of the town, where houses are big and where one day we'll live playing pool and drinking cocktails in a champagne supernova in the sky, where a woman, a rich woman, is bending down to weed her garden and her arse flashes up in the air then is gone.
Alan Bissett reading from his debut novel Boy Racers and testifying to the literature's ability to express the here and now of life on the streets, from the fizzing vitality of Robert Ferguson in the 18th century through to the present day. Experiencing intimately the culture of distinct communities is one of its strengths. But how do the people depicted react? Janet Paisley is from a village on the edge of Falkirk, the setting for her book Not for Glory.
I worried that the brick might come through the window when the book came out, but it never happened, no. Anybody who did speak to me about it actually really liked the book. And one of my neighbours, I remember Jean, her name is, an older woman, she came to the door twice to get copies of the book to give to some of her neighbours because she was sure they would fair enjoy it. She was convinced she knew the people rather than the characters. She was convinced she knew some of them were, and I said to her, no, they're all fictional characters, Jean. Aye, she says, you might say that, but I could take you that boy's door this minute.
The title, Not for Glory, where is that from?
That's from the Declaration of Arbroath. I possibly chose it because it isn't why people live their lives for the glory of it. And it isn't why writers write in Scots or write these types of stories. Certainly not for any glory.
When you write unself-consciously in the language in which you speak, the language of your community, then it has a gleefulness about it and an energy that can't be taught. And writing Boy Racers was like that. It just exploded out of me. It was an absolute release.
You're writing a voice, and that gives you a rhythm. So it's a wee bit like a song, but without music as well. You know, I can't sing a note. I think I actually write poems because I was asked to do silent singing when I was at school. I loved singing, but I was obviously one of those people. The musician would go, somebody's groaning, just you do silent singing, you know.
That'd be a great title for a book of poetry.
Silent singing, I've thought of that, yeah.
What's it like trying to survive as a maker in the 21st century?
I think trying to make a living as a maker in the 21st century is the same as it has been in the last 20 centuries. It's never been that easy. But there's good things like the Scots Live Literature Fund. I've just completed a James Hogg residency in Ettrick in the Borders there, and I wrote a wheen of new poems out of that. So there's good things happening. There's good things happening, Billy.
Liz Lochhead and Ayrshire poet Rab Wilson, whom I met at a celebration for the Renaissance maker Gavin Douglas, the first poet to call our language Scots.
The language to my lug just sounded actually quite familiar. The sook o' it, the soon o' it. In Gaelscough, MacDermid says, it's soon no sense that fathoms the heart o' men, and by my songs the rough old Scots I ken, e'en hearts that hae nae Scots'll dirl rich through as nocht else could. For here's a language rings with datchy sesames and names for nameless things. Datchy sesames, queer, magical, strange words. And that's what the Scottish language has, you know. It has these great terms for things the English just doesn't hae.
Over in Ireland, people look at you as Gaelic poet as it's an exciting thing. Here's a Scots Gaelic poet. It's got status, but over here, you know, if you're writing Lallans or if you're writing Gaelic, you're in that kind of docket that labels you in a corner. And I've been saying to people, I'm not a Gaelic poet. I'm a poet who happens to write in Gaelic, which is precious to me.
An Oors MacNiachel on love for his mother tongue and desire for the native linguistic traditions to thrive. Here, James Robertson uses Scots to exhort members of the Scottish Parliament to truly represent the people.
Dinna be gleekit, dinna be our smert, dinna craw crus, dinna be unca bleat, dinna breen gin, dinna be always late, dinna steek your lugs, dinna steek your heart, dinna be sleekit, dinna be a sook, dinna creesh nae loof for future favour, dinna swick nor swither, hash nor haver, dinna be sour of face, and dinna juke. Open your arms and minds to folk in need, hain frae filing and skaith the land and sea, tak tent of justice and the common weal, ding doon hypocrisy, wanthrift and greed. Hease up the banner o' humanity, seek out the truth, and to the truth be leal.
Be leal, be true. James also translated one of Alexander MacCall Smith's children's stories, and Sandy was delighted it was published in Scots before an English version was available. Testimony to a writer's sense of community, no matter how different their take on society. Irvin Welsh's Trainspotting and Sandy's Scotland Street seem a world apart, but they both produce memorable characters.
One of my favourite characters is little Bertie. Have you ever been accused of cruelty to children? Having a 6-year-old boy having to busk with his saxophone in the streets of Paris to find his way home?
Yes, I have been accused of cruelty to Bertie, and I get regular letters from all over the world. I was doing a literary lunch in Sydney, and afterwards these two fairly tough-looking Australian ladies, I certainly wouldn't want to have got into a literary argument with them, came up to me and said, "What are you going to do about Bertie's mother? You get rid of that woman, understand?" And they wanted some sort of accident to happen to her, which of course I can't. I don't want Bertie to lose his mother.
In one of the later novels, I noticed that he was so alienated from his mother that he put himself up for adoption on eBay.
That's right. He's got this wee friend called Ranald Braveheart Macpherson, who's got very spindly legs. And Ranald helped Bertie with the wording of the eBay advertisement, which was well-behaved boy, brackets 6.5, seeks new home, preferably Glasgow. and then Ranald says, "I think, Bertie, that maybe you should add, in brackets, non-smoker."
A feature of Scottish writing from Stevenson to Muriel, Spark, A.L. Kennedy and Kelman is the survival of the short story as a vehicle for major writing. Janice Galloway is a brilliant exponent of the genre.
Short stories are important to me because they are parables in a kind of a way. You don't go into characterisation or why people do things, just the fact that they do. And that is so much our experience of life. Now, you can write about that in a much more compacted form in a short story. Problem is, Billy, nobody will pay you to write them anymore. We keep being told that the short story is making a comeback. I'm still waiting to see it, but when it does, I'm ready.
You also use dark humour to describe relationships. There's one sequence where a young couple are having marital problems, and you suggest that the female thinks the best thing would be to talk it over, and the male thinks the best thing would be open crotch knickers.
Yep.
Which I found hilariously funny. And that idea, women are from Venus, men are from Mars, you know.
I actually remember going to the States to teach for the first time and teaching the stories from Blood, but also an amazing little story called Paternal Advice, which is almost like a kind of a Kelman-esque type story about the father getting the wee boy to jump off the mantelpiece and saying he's going to catch him, and he doesn't catch him.
Daddy's going to catch him, but he stands out of the way.
Doesn't.
And the conclusion is, trust nae
Hard story.
Hard love.
I heard that as a teacher. And I guess hearing that story as an overheard in the playground thing, my jaw just fell open, and I thought, this has to be an urban myth. And I wrote it down as plain as I could remember it, characterising the dad. He's not a monster. It hurts him to do this horrible thing he does.
It's strange that men get away with being bleak and dark, and it's a good thing if you think of Beckett, that's supposed to be good, but women don't get away with it. And I've even had experiences teaching Janice Galloway of the sexist comments at times in relation to self-pity or the gloom, for example, of something like Trick is to Keep Breathing. But I think so many male writers are allowed to be dark and gloomy and relentlessly bleak, and sometimes that's not given to women because we might expect something lighter.
Professor Willie Maley of Glasgow University, and this is Janice reading from The Trick is to Keep Breathing.
The clock ticks too loud while I lie still, shrinking. Please, God, make boulders crash through the roof. In 3 or 4 days, when the health visitor comes, she will find only mashed remains, marrowbone jelly oozing between the shards like bitumen. Well, she'll say, we're not doing so well today, are we? It's too cold. The hairs of my legs are stiff. I wish the phone would ring.
Love has always been at the heart of our literature, but only recently has gay love been depicted honestly by writers like Louise, Welsh, Christopher White and Zoe Strachan. This is Zoe reading from her novel Ever Fallen in Love, where Richard longs for the return of the days he was consumed by passion.
Richard wanted one of them back, just one, to experience again a hope so fierce that the sins of the past were cleansed, the gleam of the future untarnished. I dreamt this line of dialogue that had one male character using another male character, having just a great power over him that I didn't quite understand. And as I thought about it and started to write, I realised that for that relationship to work and one person to be able to manipulate another person that way, one of them would have to love the other one. I mean, certainly be sexually attracted to them, but probably really love them. I think that any literature of a place has to engage with all aspects of that. And I think it's taken Scottish literature a while to do that. But yeah, that's definitely changed. And it's changed for, I think, female writers first.
I was too old to call it love at first sight, but I had all the symptoms. People have died for love. They have lied and cheated and parted from those who loved them in turn. Love has slammed doors on fortunes, made bad men from heroes and heroes from libertines. Love has corrupted, cured, depraved and perverted. It's the remedy, the melody, the poison and the pain, the appetite, the antidote, the fever and the flavour. Love kills, love cures, love is a bloody menace. Oh, but it's fun while it lasts.
Louise Welsh with a wonderful passage from The Cutting Room. Another kind of love, the bittersweet love of country, has also been at the core of Scottish writing from its very beginning through to more recent struggles for a Scottish Parliament. Alan Bissett, Val McDermid, and in the Scottish Poetry Library she helped to create, Tessa Ransford.
Well, I think it's important to any country, and perhaps the less other forms of expression you have, the more you need the poetry.
And I think it is bound up with the nationalist struggle, because while Scotland is politically impotent and politically disempowered, the culture then takes up the slack, and the culture then provides the full weight for the country that the politics is missing.
A lot of the last 40 years has been about thinking about who we are, what kind of country we want to be. And I think these have all been the kind of questions you can ask and answer within a novel, within poetry, within song. These are all ways to explore those issues without being blatant about it.
You've spent a lot of time in England. Does that reinforce your Scottishness or make you less so?
I think it reinforces my Scottishness. I still feel like I live abroad. It's not my home.
I shall fill the place with books of poetry, wherein the very self of things speaks its reality. We are an educated country. We're a country of thinkers and dreamers. And if you're a country of thinkers and dreamers, you're a country of poets. As Walter Scott described us, O Caledonia, stern and wild, meet nurse, for the poetic child.
So he's saying it's in the DNA almost.
It's in the landscape, it's in the clouds, it's in the wind.
And it's in this building. I noticed coming into the building, quotation by Patrick Geddes, who is one of these great polymaths that Scotland continues to produce.
Yes.
Creando pensamus.
Creando pensamus is in coloured lights on the inside of the door, which is my very, very favourite quotation of Geddes's. It means, by creating we think. In order to think, you've got to put things together that aren't apparent. And that's what poetry does, that's what creativity does, that's what all art does.
One thing that sustains our writers is a sense of common purpose with their peers. Kathleen Jamie and Andrew Gregg, who's often discussed this with his English wife, the novelist Leslie Glaister.
She didn't feel part of anything, whereas nearly every Scottish writer I've ever met has felt part of something. There is a sense of being on the same side.
If I feel part of something, it's through personal friendships with those other writers. How we will look as a group from centuries in the future, who knows? But at the minute, I have strong personal relationships with several of these people. I feel I'm part of that gang. I'm very glad for it.
Amongst contemporary writers, well, any number of them are my friends and colleagues, so we kind of know each other. You can always pick out two writers at a group. They'll be standing fairly near each other, and neither of them will be speaking. They'll be listening to what's going on. And
a chill among us taking notes, or a quine among us taking notes.
Feeling a certain kinship, but probably wishing they weren't amongst this crowd of people and were actually in their own quiet space, getting on with writing about it, where you've got control.
Often when I'm in England, I'm appalled by contempt of other writers, particularly poets. It's a very small but very virulent world, the world of poetry. So and so should never have been published. That publisher should not exist. They think, oh, come on. You just don't hear that in Scotland. I don't want to over-idealise that, but I think there's a significant difference, because all writers have personal ambition, you have to. But it really helps if you feel part of something bigger than yourself. And I've always felt that, and I think every writer that I've ever met in this country, and I mean in Scotland, do feel that what you really want to do is add a chucky stain or two to the cairn. And I honestly mean that. I need to make it my own living. I want to have my own readership. I like to be reviewed. But what I really want to do, what makes me feel good, is to hope and believe and intend to put a few more chucky stains on the cairn.
Andy Gregg putting a wheen mair chucky stains on the cairn o' a literature that has an international reach, but is often viewed with ambivalence in the tension between Scottishness and Britishness in our society. Murray Pittock and Alasdair Gray on their experience of Scottish education.
It wasn't just that Scots universities were wanting to employ English, they were also wanting to give the students a chance of a better life elsewhere, as heads of departments maybe in England or Australia or Canada, anywhere abroad. Now, you don't want to be narrowly provincial, do you? Yes, keep Burns as a hobby. Keep any writer you like as a hobby. But if you're ambitious, you won't concentrate on that.
That was the attitude.
It was.
Yeah. Willie McIlvanney, in one of his novels, describes somebody arriving in the new town of Edinburgh and seeing the names of Hanover Street, Princes Street, etc.
Exactly.
And he makes a comment, and it's something like, Scottishness was a life, but Britishness was a career.
That is very good.
Isn't it?
The lack of status for Scottish literature has a lot to do with the way that we regard ourselves. If it's not taught throughout our education, then how are we to have regard for it? I mean, I had a full Scottish education and never came across a Scottish writer during the course of it. I read English writers, I read European writers, I read Russian writers, I read American writers. I did not at any time and was not offered Scottish writers. And that's appalling.
I think it's easier to get the sense of Scottish literature as a national literature across to broad audiences in places as disparate as the Czech Republic and the United States than it always is within the UK itself. It certainly hasn't been particularly easy to get it across into the curriculum for excellence. So, I think there's resistance in Scotland itself to the notion of Scottish literature, which is not yet dead, amazingly enough.
We are valued in other countries. I've spoken about Scottish literature in Russia. I've travelled to Ukraine and talked about it. Scottish writing is read and understood throughout the world and celebrated throughout the world. And the only place where it's ever had a bad press and been ignored is right on its own doorstep. The one thing that we seem to always have been good at is putting ourselves down, a habit I hope that we will grow out of.
Janet Paisley. Beyond Scotland, interest in the literature is increasing, as Aniela Korzeniowska discovered when she organised the first conference on the subject in Poland.
We were amazed at the interest. We had people from Germany, the Czech Republic, and from nearly all the main university centres in Poland. We had over 60 participants.
We have this amazing, rich seam of literary art that we should celebrate. I remember being in the States in 1997, and I'm sure there was queues round the block in New York because Irvine Welsh and James Kelman were signing books.
Every generation of great writers makes more possible. Liz Lochhead would be the first to acknowledge the greatness of Edwin Morgan. Meg Bateman would be the first to acknowledge the greatness of Shirley MacLaine.
How important is Scottish literature to Scottish identity?
It's crucial. It's central. Scottish culture and literature and the arts in general are what make Scotland. There is no other argument for Scottish independence than the cultural argument, and it was here long before oil was ever discovered, and it will be here long after the oil runs out. Literature is the crucial, the central thing, and it's shameful that it's been denied to so many generations.
Alan Riach, Professor of Scottish Literature at Glasgow University, our only university with a Department of Scottish Literature. All of the interviews for this series took place before the result of the independence referendum was known. So I asked both artists and academics to imagine what would happen with a yes result, which most of them wanted, or a no result, which many of them feared.
If Scotland votes yes in the referendum, I think initially there will be an upsurge of cultural energy. The writers, the artists will be trying to work out what kind of country Scotland's going to be. It'll all be up for grabs. We'll be free to actually create the kind of country that we want. And I think politically there will then be a battle between right and left. And I think that the cultural energy will be on the left. So I think it'll be very exciting. And then after that, there'll be a kind of normalisation as Scotland becomes a country like every other country. Because so much of the energy in Scottish literature has been about self-actualisation, about Scotland trying to realise itself in the absence of that politic.
I don't know whether there would be an explosion or just a great sense of our redundancy. I'm just thinking of what happened to the writers in the former Soviet Union when it collapsed and they were no longer persecuted sufficiently. They lost the whole raison d'etre, as did the Cold War spy thriller writers. It could be that, or it could be a terrific unleashing of energy. If there is a no, depending on how close it is, I think if it's a big no, that could give us that terrible hungover feeling. When we had our first referendum, that really kick-started something in Scotland. I'm hoping, and I suspect, if it's the case there's a fairly close-ish no, that could well happen again. We're going to have to go again at this thing of what Scotland is it, and what Scotland do we want?
Whether the response in the referendum is aye or no, literature will deal with that, and it will go forward and reflect the kind of society that we live in post-referendum, regardless of what that society is. That's why literature is so important for us to make an understanding of the past. You go back 300 years and you can use the literature, whether it's the poetry of Ferguson or the poetry of Burns or the novels of Walter Scott, to understand where we came from and who we are. And the same will be true post-referendum, regardless of what the decision is.
I think whether there's a yes or a no vote in the referendum, the most important thing afterwards in what I've nicknamed the year of triumphalism and recrimination is exactly to avoid these things and to focus on the international and Scotland's place in the international. And I'm conscious that psychologically it will not be good if there's a no vote to regard this as a kind of Culloden moment in Scottish culture. But equally, if there's a yes vote, not to be too rampant and to look out rather than in.
If Scotland votes no, I think what will happen is the forces of unionism will claim victory. I think the artists and the artworks that are associated with the nationalist struggle and with the socialist struggle will be further marginalised, ridiculed. There will be moves to try and write them out of the story. The cultural signifiers of nationalism and of Scottish identity will be marginalised. And that itself might give an energy to Scottish culture, because the more pressure that's placed upon it to disappear and shuffle off quietly, the more people will come out fighting.
If there's a yes, then I think we've got to get the sleeves rolled up. Like an Alasdair Gray, we've got to go for it. We're building a new nation. I think if there's no vote, then, as McDermid would say, the battle continues. Because I think there's so much stuff come out now that it can't be put back into the box. Artists are never defeated. There's always going to be a struggle. That's part and parcel of our makeup, and we'll do it, no matter what.
Sandy Moffat. I hope you've enjoyed this journey through the history of our literature, yin of the brawest o' all the flouers o' our nationheid. I only wish we'd had more time to devote to writers from the past, like William Ross, Elizabeth Melville Lady Curas, William Fowler, Stuart of Baldinnis, or from the present, John Burnside, Jackie Kay, Alan Warner, Ian Banks, Ali Smith, Don Patterson and Douglas Dunn, all contributing to a modern golden age of Scottish literature. As for the future, most writers would agree with fellow maker Hugh MacDiarmid, who wrote, "For we hae faith in Scotland's hidden poors, the present's theirs, but all the past and future's ours." I'll leave the last word to the writers, with fine prose from Alexander McCall Smith and poetry from Robert Crawford. As ever, both deal with the matter of Scotland.
Wake up, new nation. Stretch yourself. It's time to fling the covers back and sing alarm clock loud, a sharpened trill of song, greeting the daylight now that dawn has broken. You who have slept so long, too long, with one eye open.
Our tiny planet, viewed from afar, is a place of swirling clouds and dimmish blue. Scotland, though lodged large in all our hearts, is invisible at that distance, not much perhaps, but to us it is our all, our place, the opposite of nowhere. Nowhere can be seen by looking up and realizing with shock that we really are very small. You would say, yes, we are, but never overcompensate. Be content with small places, the local, the short story, rather than the saga. Take pleasure in private jokes, in expressions that cannot be translated, in references that can be understood by only 2 or 3, but which speak with such eloquence for small places, and the fellowship of those whom you know so well, and whose sayings and moods are as familiar as the weather. These mean everything. They mean the world. They mean the world.